Keon Keeley and Damon Wilson are two of the hottest recruits in the country. Ohio State is turning up the heat as they continue to go after and recruit these two young men. Who is Ohio State battling with while recruiting these young men? Who is most likely to commit to Ohio State? We'll discuss that today on Locked on Buckeyes.
You are Locked on Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked on Buckeyes, part of Locked on Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, October 19th in the year 2022, and today's episode is brought to you by SweatBlock. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. It's also available on Amazon. On today's episode, we welcome back John Garcia Jr. John Garcia Jr. is the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated, and he is Locked On's football recruiting insider. John and I have spent a lot of time talking about Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, and the recruitment of Matayo Uiagalelei as well. We also added in Adon Shuler and Aryan Carter, two guys that are currently committed to other schools, but the Buckeyes might flip them and change the school they're committed to. A fun show with John. A lot of insight, a lot of great information. John brings it, and he definitely brings it during today's episode. And as we welcome in John Garcia Jr. of Sports Illustrated, I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked on College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. John, it seems like every time we have you on, especially the past few times, it's been a defensive end type of conversation. Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, and Matayo Uiagalelei are the three guys, the hot guys, Ohio State recruiters, fans. Everyone wants them at Ohio State, all three of them, that dynamic trio. What is the latest that you've heard about Keon Keeley and Damon Wilson? Because I think those are the two guys that people have been focusing on lately.
Yeah, I think with Keeley in particular, Ohio State is really moving up the list. I think even before he decommitted from Notre Dame, we were talking Bama, right? He took the visit to Bama, decommits from Notre Dame, and you're like, okay, this is kind of Bama's race to lose. But then he takes two visits really in a row to Ohio State, one official for that Notre Dame game, and then an unofficial visit back to the Horseshoe a couple of weeks later. So clearly a lot of questions have been answered from the Ohio State angle. Now, he did get back to Bama for that official visit a couple of weeks ago. So I think it's kind of lining up to be a two-horse race, which is somewhat surprising. Again, one, we thought this was Bama's race to lose from the summer, and then we thought Florida, being the in-state school, being the childhood dream school, being the closest in proximity to Tampa, Florida, where he's from, we thought they would really start to push and get involved, but no more Florida visits of record just yet, and there's nothing scheduled going forward, which to me is the biggest part of this Keon Keeley deal. To me, that signals, hey, I'm winding things down. You know, he's not the rah-rah, look at me, social media kid. So those two elements kind of tell me this isn't going to be a signing day, ESPN, do the drama kind of deal. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but It's just not in Keon Keeley's wheelhouse, it appears. So I think those two things probably signal that, hey, in the next month or so, this thing's going to really start to wind down. And I think that's good news for both Ohio State and Alabama. Probably not great news for Florida unless another visit comes up. And I do think Notre Dame will have a hat on the table. But again, as we reported the last time I was on with you, the communication has really, really slowed down almost to a halt between the Keeley camp and the Notre Dame camp. So it's going to be, heavyweight versus heavyweight here, right? Saban versus Day, two great defenses that have churned out pass rushers towards the NFL pretty much every single year, it feels like. So this is going to be a knockdown, drag it out kind of deal here in the home stretch. He's visited both campuses twice since the end of the summer. You would imagine most of his questions have been answered at this point. Obviously, from the Ohio State angle, Larry Johnson provides just a different oomph to any pass rusher recruit. And I think that's something that Keeley is weighing heavily in this final analysis. So the question becomes, look, Bama had this perceived lead, maybe big lead once he decommitted from Notre Dame. How much of that gap is closed by Ohio State? Is it partially closed, or did they close it all the way? And I think the exclusion of Florida in the buzz department probably tells me that Ohio State has closed this gap nearly all the way to where the Keeley camp is comfortable with either shade of red, if you will. So I think we're getting down to the home stretch here, and it's getting closer to coin flip status. Bama getting the last visit and that early buzz is, I think, hard for anyone to overcome. But at that same token, if anyone can do it, it's going to be Day, Knowles, Larry Johnson, and Ohio State.
Damon Wilson, what have you heard about him lately?
This one is totally different. I think not only is Ohio State gaining buzz, just like we've talked about with Keeley, but I think it's more tangible buzz. This one at one point felt totally wide open, right? I know when we first started talking about the Venice, Florida defensive end, it was like, he's just got to hit the road. He's got to get on the visit trail and see where the chips fall. Well, he started to do that. And in that process, we thought it was going to be this 5-6 team race, kind of a bigger deal with some in-state schools involved, and it was going to come down to the wire. And while it still might come down to the wire, the favorites are starting to form out of state, particularly with two other shades of red, Ohio State and the Georgia Bulldogs. I think those are the primary contenders for Wilson. He's taken official visits or unofficial visits to both campuses here during the season as well. And again, another heavyweight battle is forming. Alabama's in that conversation. At one point, Miami looked like it held some buzz for Wilson, but we haven't seen any visits of record back down south to Coral Gables. And you wonder if Texas, which piqued his interest after their hot summer, could they get him back on campus? Maybe that can start to throw a wrinkle or a wrench into this recruitment. But as things stand right now, Jay, it looks like another two-horse race. But instead of Bama, it's defending national champion Georgia, which obviously has their own, elite pedigree. So if you're going to win these battles from the Ohio State angle, or for that matter, the Bama and Georgia angle, you're going to have to overcome fellow elite blue bloods, programs that are very much in that 1% of schools nationally, where it's like we go out and get the best of the best. So we know we've been talking about these three defensive ends the entire time. It looks like you're going to at least get one. I'm not sure which one is the most likely at this point. I think the buzz with Wilson is a little surprising to me relative to what we hear of Keeley and Uiagalelei. So I do think being in two team races is very good news for the Buckeyes, especially with the familiarity with Matayo dating way back to years past. I think that increases the odds of maybe getting two of these three pass rushers. So I think that's probably the realistic goal, right? You can't strike out. I think that would be viewed very negatively for Day, Knowles, and especially Larry Johnson. It's just not something we expect or really have seen from a recruiting perspective. But I think the ceiling is maybe two of these guys. And right now, Damon Wilson appears to be the guy who is feeling the Buckeyes the most. And I think the late start to his recruitment, combined with Ohio State's great start to the season, those great atmospheres he was able to take in, and the improvement on defense in particular, are all pointing very much up for Ohio State on the trend meter there. So the only question with him is, when is he going to do it, right? Does he extend it all the way to signing day? I think Texas, Miami in particular, are really going to try to push him to extend that process, maybe take another trip or two before all is said and done. But there's no doubt right now it's Ohio State and Georgia for Wilson, and it's Ohio State and Bama for Keon Keeley. And again, Uiagalelei has always held the Buckeyes in high regard. So I think things are shaping up much stronger for the Buckeyes since the season began, as opposed to prior to that, where it appeared like one of these three would be a great haul for Ohio State. And that would still be the case if it happened. But now I think the ceiling has adjusted and it's a little bit higher. And I think the Buckeyes have a realistic chance of snagging two of these big three.
John, we mentioned the two, Keeley and Wilson. I've seen a lot more tweets and things about them lately. But for Matayo Uiagalelei, is it a two-horse race, Ohio State and one other school, in regards to who he might commit to?
I think it's still 3 teams there. I
Okay.
still think USC, obviously the hometown school, we know about the buzz that they've created on and off the field. The music program there is something that really is piquing his interest. I think they're going to stay in it all the way. And then Oregon. I think Oregon has found a way, even in transitioning coaching staffs, to stay in this race. He played a high school game at the Ducks Stadium a couple weeks ago, so naturally he stayed overnight and was able to visit once again that following game day. And Oregon, as well, has probably outperformed expectation on the field, something that is, a bit more of a staying power force in the Uiagalelei recruitment. I think, Bama and Clemson are still there, but it does feel like a separate issue. It does feel like it's those 3 teams, the 2 in the Pac-12, and of course the Ohio State Buckeyes, where again, he's just so well-traveled and so familiar that we're starting to split hairs and trying to figure out where he's going to go. And again, still here, no end in sight to this recruitment. So that one, I think, could be the one that we find out, at the very end of the cycle, as opposed to Keeley, who should come off the board first. Wilson is a little bit more TBD, and I think Matayo waits almost all the way through.
I wonder, with the Buckeyes having an off week this past week, getting back on the field this weekend against Iowa as they finish the final 6 games of the regular season, I believe, John, it's more just like general current state of college football talk. I think JT Tuimoloau is going to be setting up to have a big second half of the season. His numbers don't really tell how well he's been playing this year. And I wonder how his play on the field will impact Matayo, because you said it, I think the first time we talked about him, you said they profile very similarly. And with JT Tuimoloau possibly being that guy that really, once he kind of pops and has that one monster game, it's consistent play. I wonder how Matayo watches that and sees that and says, oh, year 1 under Jim Knowles, Larry Johnson's still there. Ryan Day is letting the defense do some different things. And the guy that's like me at Ohio State is doing this. I wonder how that sways or pulls or draws Matayo from the West Coast to Columbus, because he's seeing a guy at Ohio State who's similar to him play very, very well this year at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, the similarities are piling up, right? Both West Coast guys, Polynesian descent, similar frame, similar fame on top of that. Both guys are great tight ends at the high school level, but we're really, no-brainers to play defense at the next level. And there's expected transition there in going from a 2-way talent to a 1-way. Let's put all our chips in on the defensive side of the ball kind of deal. Obviously, JT also got there so late, right? So a bit of a delayed learning curve there for him. But yeah, the light bulb appears to be about to really go off for him, and you can't really understate that potential impact with Matayo. I think that's a great point. It's not singular with JT. There's a lot of Polynesian ties to that Ohio State roster. There long has been. It's kind of a misconception. You expect that in the Pac-12. Maybe it's select other programs, but Ohio State is one of those schools. So I do think that's important to consider here going forward. And look, we should also not underestimate how important it is for these high school recruits to connect with these college athletes. I think, especially in Matayo's case, where he's so well-traveled, Jay, he's talked to every head coach, every coordinator, every position coach. I mean, he could probably conduct the interview or the office session himself at this point. But it's different when you talk to the players that are there. They're living what you expect to go through in years, in the future. So I do think it hits a little bit different. And the kids who have been going through the process longer, again, like Matayo, they tend to lean on those current roster opinions a little bit more than those who are newer to the recruiting scene or a late bloomer into the recruiting scene. So I do think, the JT angle here cannot be undersold relative to Matayo. So it'll be fascinating for all 3 of these guys. But yeah, Uiagalelei will have a whole lot of fanfare and a lot of mystery and intrigue going into his pick.
John, there are a couple of guys that we talked about pre-show that are no quarterback, no commitment that just recently happened. It's a young man, Adon Shuler, who is currently committed to Notre Dame, and then also Aryan Carter, who's currently committed to Memphis. And the thought is Could Ohio State flip these recruits, flip these players from the schools they're currently committed to come to Ohio State? I put one in the show notes. There's two that we're going to talk about, Shuler and Carter. Let's start with Shuler first, Notre Dame commit. What can you tell us about him and the possibility of Ohio State flipping him to go from South Bend to possibly Columbus?
Yeah, kind of on the Keon Keeley path in that regard. Look, Shuler just got his Ohio State offer, I think, this week. His teammate in 2024 is another elite defensive prospect who's taking a visit to Columbus. So you wonder if Shuler just, hey, let me catch that ride with you, my good friend. So he could be in Columbus. That's something to watch out for, when that Iowa game kicks. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially with, look, let's be honest, the Irish have underachieved, right? Yeah. I think everybody involved in that organization will tell you as much. We've seen a rash of decommitments with Notre Dame, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, led by Keeley. So I do think that there's, some folks keeping an eye out on things. And when Shuler picked up that Buckeye offer, he told 24/7 Sports it was one of his dream offers. So we know about the Buckeye presence on the East Coast, particularly New Jersey. They've already got a good safety from that state committed in Jaden Bonsu. So this DB class is massive, right? A half dozen guys, but I do think there could be a fit for Shuler because, as we talked about pre-show, a lot of corners are in this group. I think Cedric Hawkins is listed as a safety. He's one of the best nickels in the country, so I think he will probably play inside at the next level, which leaves Bonsu, who we mentioned, big physical downhill safety, and it leaves Malik Hartford, who's one of the better classic safeties in this class. So if Shuler can be a bit more of a balanced safety prospect, especially in the coverage department, I do think that there's a fit in this recruiting class, despite it being so big for the Buckeyes. So that is something very interesting to keep an eye on relative to Shuler. And then with the Memphis commitment, Aryan Carter, man, Jay, this is the hottest kid in the country, right? This is a kid who committed to Memphis in July. But if you look at the recent offers that have come in, he's got over 30 right now. All the new ones are in the Power 5. Yeah. Heavy SEC, heavy Big Ten, heavy ACC among the schools that have come in. And now he's starting to take other visits. So no disrespect to that Memphis coaching staff, but I know every single weekend they're going to be on their pins and cues trying to figure out, hey, did Arion make that trip? Because it's a heavy hitting list of schools. In chronological order, he's supposed to go to Tennessee next weekend, which now feels like a much bigger offer than it did 1 week ago. After that, Ohio State in November, LSU, Bama for the Iron Bowl against Auburn. I mean, these are huge programs, huge names. I know Michigan was involved at one point recently as well. So this has got all the makings of a, hey, let's totally reset this recruitment and figure out where we're going to play college ball. And he's one of these great senior risers, right? A kid who plays primarily running back on Friday nights, but we could see the skill translating over to the linebacker position, 6'1", 210 pounds or so. So certainly has the build to do so as well, and profile as a modern sideline-to-sideline linebacker that every single program needs, especially when you get to SEC and Big Ten ball, where there's still a lot of balanced offenses out there. So he's red hot. I couldn't tell you where he's leaning at this point, but I would say the odds of him sticking with that Memphis commitment appear to be relatively low based on some of those big brand names that are after him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that one. If you got all these Power 5 offers and one of them is Ohio State, and you're currently committed to Memphis better be doing something really special or starting you day one. But even then, it's like, hey, if I go to Alabama or Memphis, probably going to Alabama. If I go to Ohio State,
he is from Tennessee. He is from the state. He's from Smyrna. So proximity is going to help the Tigers here. But look, Tennessee is still on the hunt for him as well. So you can't even really bank on that from the Memphis perspective. But it'll be fascinating. It's happened before, but it's not very common to see a prospect stick with a group of 5 school over droves of new, heavy, and blue blood Power 5 interest all at once.
John, what kind of player is Arion Carter? All these schools coming after him, Power 5 schools coming after him right now. What kind of player is he? What makes him so special?
Well, we just see a lot of ability on Friday nights. The athleticism and twitch he shows at both running back and on defense is something that a lot of programs have jumped all over. I think you could project him as an inside linebacker. You could probably move him outside and ask him to cover slot receivers, running backs, maybe even tight ends with the ability he shows. And then worst case, you could send him on a blitz, right? You know, a kid who's that well versed at running back understands blocking schemes, vision, and when to pull your trigger and come downhill and fill the hole. There's just a lot of 3-down ability in Carter's game. And again, those are prospects at that position that are fewer and further in between. Very hard to find in any recruiting cycle. So the kids who are late risers like Carter have an opportunity to fall up in the recruiting process. So, you know, good eval and early impression by the Memphis Tigers. But yeah, everybody else has caught on here, and his senior tape has allowed him to become one of the more intriguing national flip candidates here, but before all is said and done.
John, I mentioned a little connection between Matayo and JT Tuimoloau a while earlier. There's a kid at Ohio State currently. He's a true freshman, Dallin Hayden, who's also from Tennessee, the state of Tennessee. And Dallin Hayden was not supposed to really play this year. Evan Pryor got injured in the offseason, and then moving up in the depth chart is Dallin Hayden. And in the mop-up duty that he's played, we have seen him play very, very well. A kid that got raved some reviews from Tony Alford, the running back coach at Ohio State. And we're seeing that Dallin Hayden come in and play hard, go hard every rep, do everything right, run hard when he's on the field, break tackles, slip, score. And that could be something as well where it's like, hey, this guy from my state went to Ohio State. He grinded, he worked. And when he got his chance to move up in the depth chart due to an unfortunate injury, he moved up and he's playing well on the field. Young kids want to play. And I know it's like, coming in, you're probably not going to start, but you want to play. And you also wanted to go to a place that can develop you. Ohio State's had plenty of good running backs. Tony Alford's a big reason why the running back room at Ohio State is developed like it is. And this young man, Carter, if he does leave Memphis and come to Ohio State, Dallin Hayden, a kid from his own state, who was just grinded and worked and found time and ways to get on the field, that could be the same thing for Carter saying, look, I know Ohio State's running backs are talented. The top of the room is talented. But this kid who's a true freshman is coming in, working hard. That could be me if I go to Ohio State and get developed very, very quickly. Another word, connection. But you said it. Kids look at this kind of stuff when making decisions about where they're going to play college football.
Look, and Ohio State recruits nationally, right? So if you really dig into it, there are going to be ties to all sorts of areas of the country. So there's always some precedent for the Buckeyes to reach out and pick up steam quickly with a new prospect. We talked about it with all these guys, right? We talked about it with the kid out of New Jersey, Shuler, and now, Carter out of Tennessee, Uiagalelei out of California. I mean, look, that's literally spanning the coast, multiple time zones covered with just those three guys. And those are just the three latest recruits to talk about here. So yeah, there's always an OSU connection. One of the benefits of truly recruiting from a national base. And yeah, it usually helps at the 11th hour as we get closer to signing day. And as we look up now, we're right about 2 months away. So we're getting close to that point.
Yes, we are. John Garcia Jr., love having you on the show. If you could let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and then follow some of the great stuff you guys have going right now over at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, Twitter is John Garcia _JR. We'll talk a lot of college ball and, of course, recruiting on there. And, yeah, si.com/college for all your college football, recruiting, and basketball needs right there in one spot.
And, guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Send your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. You guys love John Garcia Jr. He's back here talking a ton of recruits today. Leave your comments in the YouTube comment section. Let us know. Let me know what you think about what John said. Do you agree or disagree? The opinions are there. I'm curious to hear what you got to say. I would love for Ohio State to get all these kids. I understand reality is that's not going to happen. But John, I'm glad to have you back on the show. Man, looking forward to do this once again. Thanks for coming back on, John. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Jay. Thanks for having me.